There is a specific sound that power makes when it leaves a room. It is not a slam of a door, nor is it the shouting of voices raised in anger. It is much quieter than that. It is the soft click of a pen being capped, the subtle shift of weight in a leather chair, the way eyes stop meeting yours and begin to look past you, toward someone else who has suddenly become more important. I know that sound intimately. I have heard it my entire life, usually directed at me, usually because I am a woman, usually because I am the daughter who preferred the ledger to the limelight. But there is another sound, one that is far more satisfying, and it is the sound of power returning to its rightful owner. It sounds like the shutter of a camera closing. It sounds like a gavel striking wood. It sounds like the silence that follows when a man realizes he has spoken too much, too loudly, into a device he thought was off. My name is Zymna. I am 38 years old. I am the Chief Financial Officer of Vance Industries, though for the last 6 months, my brother Julian has been trying very hard to convince the board that my title is merely ceremonial. They thought I was clueless. They thought I was passive. They thought I was the kind of woman who would accept a severance package and a pat on the head in exchange for the company my father built. They were wrong. And the mic was on the whole time. To understand why this had to happen, you have to understand the architecture of our family. We are not the kind of family that screams. We are the kind of family that sues. We are old money, established in Connecticut during the post-war boom. The kind of wealth that is managed by trusts and protected by layers of LLCs that most people cannot pronounce. My father, Arthur Vance, was a man of few words and many signatures. He believed that emotion was a liability in business. He taught me that numbers do not lie, but people do. He taught me to watch the hands, not the mouth. Julian, my older brother by 4 years, learned a different lesson. He learned that if you speak loudly enough, people will assume you know where you are going. He was the golden child, the one who played college football, the one who dated the debutantes, the one who stood at the head of the table during holidays and held court. I was the one who sat at the end, checking the inventory reports on my phone under the tablecloth. When our father died, it was not a surprise. He had been ill for 2 years, a slow decline managed by a team of specialists who billed us by the minute. But the death itself, when it came, was sudden enough to leave the will in a state of ambiguity that Julian exploited immediately. The funeral was a study in performance. Julian wore a suit that cost more than most people's cars, and he spoke about our father's legacy with a cadence that sounded rehearsed. I wore black, simple and severe, and I stood behind him. I watched the shareholders, the board members, the distant cousins who only appeared when there was money to be inherited. They looked at Julian and saw a leader. They looked at me and saw a widow's peak and a quiet demeanor. They saw a woman who might be easily persuaded to sell her shares for a premium so she could retire to a vineyard in Napa. They did not know that I had been balancing the company's books since I was 25. They did not know that I knew where every dollar was hidden, every offshore account, every shell company used to shield assets from taxes. They did not know that, while Julian was out playing golf with potential investors, I was in the basement archives, digitizing 20 years of financial records. I let them think I was weak. Weakness is a camouflage. It allows you to move through a house without creaking the floorboards. The betrayal did not happen all at once. It was erosion, like water against a stone. It started 3 months after the funeral. Julian called a special board meeting. I was not invited. I found out about it when I tried to access the server to approve the quarterly payroll and found my credentials had been revoked. I stood in my office, the screen glowing blue in the dim light, and I felt a cold spike in my chest. It was not fear. It was calculation. They had locked me out. They had changed the passwords. They had assumed that without access, I was powerless. They assumed I would call it, that I would call Julian, that I would demand entry with the frustration of an employee who has been slighted. I did not do any of those things. I closed my laptop. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot, watching the cars come and go. I watched Julian's silver Porsche pull into the reserved spot near the entrance. I watched him get out, talking on his phone, laughing. He looked victorious. He looked like a man who thought he had won the war before the battle had even begun. I went home that day and I did not cry. I made dinner. I ate it alone at the kitchen island. I opened my personal laptop, the one they did not know about, the one that was not connected to the company network. I began to write. I did not write a diary, I wrote a timeline. I wrote down every instance of irregularity I had noticed in the last year. The vendors that had no physical addresses. The consulting fees that were paid to a company called Apex Solutions, which I had never heard of before. The sudden increase in travel expenses for Julian that coincided with no actual business trips. I had noticed them before, but I had filed them away as things to address later. Later had arrived. I spent the next week operating in the shadows. I still went to the office. I still sat at my desk. I still smiled at the assistants who looked at me with pity. They thought I was waiting to be fired. They thought I was packing my boxes in my head. Instead, I was gathering. I used my physical key card to access the archives. I used my personal knowledge of the filing system to pull the hard copies of the contracts Julian thought he had digitized and deleted. Paper is permanent. Digital data can be wiped. Paper leaves a trail of dust. I needed evidence. Not just suspicions, but evidence that would hold up in a court of law. I needed to prove breach of fiduciary duty. I needed to prove embezzlement. I needed to prove that Julian was actively dismantling the company to fund a lifestyle that exceeded his liquidity. I hired a forensic accountant. Her name was Sarah. She was a woman in her 50s with glasses that slid down her nose and a mind like a steel trap. We met in a coffee shop 3 towns over, one where no one from our social circle would ever be seen drinking drip coffee. I slid a USB drive across the table. She did not ask questions. She did not ask for a retainer up front. She looked at the drive, then she looked at me. She knew who I was. Everyone in the industry knew the Vance family. She knew that if I was doing this, it was because the situation was critical. She told me it would take 2 weeks. I told her I would give her 3. I wanted her to be thorough. I wanted her to find everything. While she worked, I continued to play the part of the ousted executive. I went to the gym. I went to lunch with friends who asked me how I was holding up. I told them I was taking some time to reflect. I told them I was considering my options. I let the rumor mill churn. I let Julian hear that I was depressed. I let him hear that I was seeing a therapist. I let him believe that I was crumbling. Arrogance is a blindfold. Julian wore it tightly. He began to make mistakes. He started holding meetings in the home office, the one our father had used, the one that was equipped with a smart home system that I had helped install 5 years ago. He thought he was secure. He thought the walls were soundproof. He did not know that the system had a diagnostic mode, a mode that recorded audio for quality assurance during setup, a mode that I had never disabled because I liked the ability to check the logs if the system malfunctioned. He did not know that I still had the admin password. He did not know that every Sunday morning, when he went over to the house to meet with his private advisors, the system was listening. I checked the logs every Monday. I listened to the fragments. I heard him talking about selling the manufacturing division to a competitor. I heard him talking about undervaluing the assets so he could buy them out himself once I was fully removed from the board. I heard him say, with a clarity that chilled the air in my own living room, that I was too emotional to understand the business, that I would never fight him because I didn't have the stomach for it. He said I was just like our mother. He said I would break. I did not break. I saved the files. I saved them to 3 different encrypted drives. I sent one to a lawyer. I kept one in a safety deposit box. I kept one on my person. I began to prepare the legal framework for my countermove. I retained a litigation firm that specialized in corporate governance. They were expensive. They were ruthless. They were exactly what I needed. We met in a conference room with glass walls and a view of the city skyline. I laid out the timeline. I laid out the financial discrepancies Sarah had found. I laid out the recordings. The lead partner, a man named David who had seen every kind of corporate warfare imaginable, listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back. He told me that what I had was sufficient to freeze Julian's assets. He told me that what I had was sufficient to remove him from the board for cause. He told me that what I had was sufficient to initiate a criminal investigation if I chose to go that route. I told him I wanted all of it. I told him I wanted Julian to understand exactly what he had lost. I told him I did not want money. I wanted control. I wanted the company to remain intact. I wanted Julian to be removed from the equation permanently. The plan was set. We would wait for the quarterly board meeting. It was the perfect venue. All the shareholders would be there. The press would be there. Julian was planning to use the meeting to announce a restructuring plan that would effectively dilute my shares and give him majority control. He was going to present it as a necessary evolution for the company. He was going to paint me as an obstacle to progress. He was going to ask for a vote. He was confident. I could feel his confidence radiating through the office walls. He walked past my desk sometimes, not even looking at me, humming a tune. He brought in a new assistant, a young man who looked at me with suspicion as if I were a spy. I smiled at him. I brought him coffee. I asked him about his weekend. I made myself harmless. I made myself invisible. This was the most dangerous phase. If Julian suspected I was preparing a counterattack, he would destroy the evidence. He would wipe the servers. He would lawyer up before I could file the injunction. I had to let him walk into the trap. I had to let him hang himself. The week before the meeting, the tension in the house was palpable. We still lived near each other, a requirement of the family trust that mandated we maintain a presence in the family estate grounds. I saw his car in the driveway. I saw the lights on in his study late at night. I knew he was preparing his presentation. I knew he was rehearsing his speech. I imagined him standing in front of the mirror, practicing the look of concerned leadership. I imagined him practicing the lines where he would express regret about having to move me aside for the good of the company. I practiced my own lines. I did not practice them in the mirror. I practiced them in my head. I did not need to look confident. I needed to look inevitable. I prepared my own presentation. It was not a speech. It was a dossier. I printed the financial audits. I printed the transcripts of the recordings. I printed the legal filings. I put them in black binders. I labeled them clearly. I did not hide them. I wanted them to be seen. The morning of the meeting arrived with a heavy sky. It was raining, a steady, cold rain that blurred the windows of the conference center where we held the major shareholder events. I arrived early. I wore a suit that was tailored to perfection, navy blue, sharp shoulders. I wore my hair pulled back. I wore no jewelry except for my watch. I walked into the room and sat at the far end of the table, away from the head where Julian would sit. I placed my black binders in front of me. I placed my phone on the table, face up. The other board members began to arrive. They greeted Julian with handshakes and claps on the back. They greeted me with nods and polite smiles. They did not know what was coming. They thought this was a routine procedure. They thought Julian had already secured the votes. He had been lobbying them for weeks. He had taken them to dinners. He had promised them dividends. He had promised them stability. He did not know that stability was about to be redefined. Julian took his seat at the head of the table. He looked at me. For the first time in months, he made eye contact. He smiled. It was a patronizing smile. It was the smile of a brother who thinks he is doing his sister a favor by letting her watch. He opened his laptop. He connected it to the projector. The screen behind him lit up with the company logo. He began to speak. He talked about vision. He talked about the future. He talked about the need for decisive leadership. He talked about the past with a dismissive wave of his hand. He mentioned our father, but only to say that our father's methods were outdated. He mentioned me, but only to say that the CFO role required a different skill set in the modern era. He did not say my name. He referred to me as the current incumbent. He was erasing me in real time. I watched him. I did not take notes. I did not fidget. I watched his hands. I watched the way he clicked the remote to advance the slides. I watched the sweat forming on his upper lip. He was nervous, but he was hiding it well. He thought he was hiding it. When he finished his presentation, he opened the floor for questions. There were a few softball questions from people he had already briefed. They asked about the timeline. They asked about the transition. He answered them with ease. He was in his element. He was performing. Then he called for the vote. He asked for a show of hands to approve the restructuring plan. He looked around the room. He looked confident. He looked at me. He expected me to abstain. He expected me to leave. This was the moment. I did not raise my hand. I did not leave. I stood up. The movement was slow. It drew every eye in the room. The silence that fell was absolute. Julian frowned. He asked me if I had a question. I told him I did not have a question. I told him I had a correction. I walked to the front of the room. I did not go to the podium. I went to the table where the copies of the binders were stacked. I picked one up. I walked over to the board member on my left. I placed the binder in front of him. I walked to the next one. I placed the binder in front of him. I continued until every person at the table had a black binder. I placed the last one in front of Julian. I told them to open to page 1. I told them that before they voted to restructure the company, they needed to understand the current financial reality. I told them that the restructuring plan Julian had proposed was based on fraudulent data. I told them that the assets he claimed were undervalued were actually being siphoned off through shell companies. I told them that the consulting fees he claimed were necessary for growth were being paid to accounts he controlled. I spoke calmly. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse him of lying. I accused the data of being incorrect. I let the documents speak for me. I watched the room change. I watched the confusion turn to concern. I watched the concern turn to alarm. Julian stood up. He told them I was out of order. He told them I was emotional. He told them I was trying to sabotage the company. He reached for his phone. He said he was calling security. I told him that security was already outside. I told him that the police were on their way. I told him that the SEC had been notified that morning. He froze. The color drained from his face. He looked at the board members. They were not looking at him anymore. They were looking at the binders. They were turning the pages. They were seeing the numbers. They were seeing the red flags that Sarah had highlighted. They were seeing the transcripts of the recordings. They were hearing his voice in their heads, admitting to the fraud. I had included the QR codes in the binder that linked to the audio files. I told them they could scan the code if they wanted to hear the context. I told them they did not have to take my word for it. I told them the evidence was self-explanatory. Julian slammed his hand on the table. He shouted at me. He called me a traitor. He said I was destroying our family. I looked at him. I told him that he had destroyed the family the moment he decided that greed was more important than loyalty. I told him that I was not destroying anything. I was cleaning up a mess. I was restoring order. The board chairman, an older man who had known our father for 40 years, stood up. He looked at Julian. He looked at me. He asked me if the information was verified. I told him it had been verified by an independent forensic audit. I told him the legal opinion was attached in the back of the binder. I told him that if they voted for Julian's plan, they would be complicit in the fraud. I told them that I was offering them a way out. I told them that if they voted to remove Julian immediately and appoint an interim CEO, I would handle the transition. I told them I would not sue the company. I told them I would sue Julian personally. The room was silent. The rain tapped against the windows. Julian looked around desperately. He looked for an ally. He found none. The chairman nodded. He called for a new vote. A vote to suspend Julian pending investigation. A vote to freeze his access to company funds. A vote to appoint me as the interim CEO. The hands went up. Every single one. Even the ones Julian had counted on. Even the ones he had bought. They were not stupid. They saw the numbers. They saw the risk. They chose survival. Julian sank into his chair. He looked small. The suit did not fit him anymore. The arrogance had evaporated, leaving only the hollow shell of a man who had been caught. He did not speak. He did not argue. He knew it was over. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They did not make a scene. They walked in quietly. They spoke to Julian in low tones. They asked him to come with them. He stood up. He looked at me one last time. He wanted me to feel something. He wanted me to feel pity. He wanted me to feel guilt. I felt nothing. I felt only the completion of a task. I watched him walk out of the room. I watched the doors close behind him. The sound was soft. It was the sound of power leaving the room. But this time, it was leaving him. The aftermath was not chaotic. It was methodical. I went back to my office. I sat at my desk. I logged into the server. My credentials worked again. The IT team had restored my access the moment the vote was cast. I checked the payroll. I checked the accounts. I checked the security logs. I spent the rest of the day working. I did not celebrate. I did not go out for drinks. I did not call my friends. I worked. There was too much to do. The company had been wounded. It needed to heal. I had to stabilize the stock price. I had to reassure the investors. I had to communicate with the employees who were worried about their jobs. I had to testify before the grand jury. I had to sit for depositions. I had to oversee the liquidation of Julian's assets to repay the company. It was a lot of work. It was exactly the kind of work I liked. It was clear. It was logical. It was necessary. The media caught wind of it, of course. You cannot hide a scandal like that in a town like ours. The headlines were predictable. Brother betrays sister. Corporate espionage in family firm. The Vance empire crumbles. I did not give interviews. I issued one statement. It was brief. It said that the company was committed to integrity and that appropriate legal action had been taken. It did not mention Julian by name. It did not gloating. It was professional. The public loved it. They loved the idea of the quiet sister winning. They loved the idea of justice being served without a scream. I became a symbol for a week. Then the news cycle moved on. That was fine. I did not want to be a symbol. I wanted to be a CEO. Julian's legal troubles dragged on for a year. He tried to fight it. He tried to claim insanity. He tried to claim coercion. He tried to claim that I had forged the evidence. It did not work. The evidence was too solid. The recordings were too clear. The money trail was too bright. He was convicted of embezzlement and fraud. He was sentenced to prison. He was stripped of his shares. He was stripped of his position. He was stripped of his reputation. I heard he was in a minimum security facility upstate. I did not visit. I did not write. I sent a letter once, through my lawyer. It contained the final accounting of what he owed the company. It contained the payment plan he was required to follow upon his release. It contained no personal message. It was just business. The family dynamic changed. The cousins who had sided with Julian stopped calling. The stepmother, who had always been weak, moved to Florida. She sent a Christmas card once. I sent one back. It was polite. It was distant. We were not a family anymore. We were a collection of individuals bound by history and law. I was okay with that. Family is not blood. Family is loyalty. Julian had broken the contract. I had enforced it. The company grew. Under my leadership, we expanded into new markets. We invested in technology. We improved the benefits for the employees. We became more profitable than we had been under our father. We became more stable. The board trusted me. They knew I would not steal from them. They knew I would not lie to them. They knew that if I said I would do something, I would do it. That is all anyone really wants. Certainty. Sometimes, I think about that day in the conference room. I think about the look on Julian's face when he realized the mic was on. Not the physical mic, but the metaphorical one. The mic of competence. The mic of preparation. He thought he was the only one who knew how to play the game. He thought that because he was loud, he was right. He forgot that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding the match. I did not set out to destroy him. I set out to protect the company. His destruction was a byproduct of his own choices. I simply provided the mechanism. I simply opened the door. He walked through it himself. There are people who say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. Revenge is not a dish. It is a meal you prepare for yourself. It is the nutrition you need to survive the poison someone else tried to feed you. It is not about hate. It is about balance. When someone takes from you, you must take back. Not because you are angry, but because if you do not, you teach them that it is acceptable to take. I taught Julian that it was not acceptable. I taught the board that I was not a figurehead. I taught myself that I was capable of anything I set my mind to. I am not a victim. I am a survivor. I am a strategist. I am the CEO. I still work late. I still sit in the office after everyone else has gone home. The building is quiet. The lights are low. I can hear the hum of the servers. I can hear the wind outside. I can hear the silence. It is a good silence. It is not the silence of absence. It is the silence of order. I look at the desk. It is clean. There are no hidden microphones anymore. I do not need them. I have nothing to hide. I have nothing to fear. I have the truth. And the truth is the most powerful weapon of all. It does not need to be shouted. It only needs to be spoken. People ask me sometimes if I regret it. If I regret putting my brother in prison. If I regret tearing the family apart. I tell them that the family was already torn. I tell them that I just stopped pretending it was whole. I tell them that I sleep very well at night. I tell them that justice is not about forgiveness. It is about accountability. If you break the law, you go to jail. If you steal, you pay it back. If you betray, you lose trust. These are not complex concepts. They are basic principles. Julian forgot them. I remembered them. That is the only difference between us. He thought the rules did not apply to him. I knew the rules were the only thing that mattered. I walk through the office sometimes, and I see the young women working in the cubicles. I see them looking at me. I see the way they straighten their backs when I walk by. I see the way they speak up in meetings when I ask for their opinion. I hope they know that they can do what I did. I hope they know that they do not have to accept being overlooked. I hope they know that they do not have to accept being stolen from. I hope they know that they can be cold. I hope they know that they can be controlled. I hope they know that they can win. It is not about being nice. It is about being effective. Kindness is a virtue, but boundaries are a necessity. You cannot have one without the other. The story of what happened to Julian is known in the industry now. It is a cautionary tale. Young executives are told not to mess with Vance. They are told that the books are clean. They are told that the leadership is watchful. They are told that if you try to cut a corner, Zymna will find it. They are told that if you try to hide a transaction, Zymna will see it. They are told that if you think she is weak, you are already defeated. I like that reputation. I earned it, I did not inherit it. Julian inherited his position. I inherited my work ethic. That is why I am still here. That is why he is not. There are days when I miss the way things were, before the illness, before the greed, before the betrayal. I miss the holidays when we were children. I miss the way our father used to laugh when we solved a puzzle together. I miss the idea of a brother. But you cannot mourn a ghost. Julian died the day he chose money over family. The man in prison is just the shell that remains. I do not mourn him. I mourn the potential he wasted. I mourn the trust he burned. But I do not regret the fire. Sometimes you have to burn down the rot to save the structure. Sometimes you have to lose a limb to save the body. I am the body. The company is the body. I protected it. I sit here now, writing this in my mind, looking out at the city. The lights are coming on. The day is ending. Another day of work is done. Another day of stability is secured. I will go home. I will eat dinner. I will sleep. Tomorrow I will do it again. I will check the numbers. I will check the logs. I will check the people. I will remain vigilant. I will remain controlled. I will remain Zymna. And if anyone else thinks they can take what is mine, if anyone else thinks I am clueless, if anyone else thinks the mic is off, they will learn the same lesson Julian learned. They will learn that silence is not empty. Silence is full. It is full of observation. It is full of preparation. It is full of power. And when I finally speak, the whole room will listen. Because they will know that when I speak, the evidence is already on the table. The verdict is already written. The only thing left to do is to close the file. I remember the moment I decided to do this. It was not in the boardroom. It was in the car, driving home from the hospital the day my father died. Julian was in the front seat. I was in the back. He was on the phone, talking about the stock price. He was talking about the funeral arrangements. He was talking about everything except the fact that our father was gone. I looked out the window. I saw the trees passing by. I saw the gray sky. I made a promise to myself. I promised that I would not let him turn our father's life work into a cash register. I promised that I would not let him turn our family name into a joke. I promised that I would be the guardian. It was a heavy promise. It was a lonely promise, but I kept it. The legal fees were high. The emotional toll was significant. The stress was immense. There were nights I could not sleep. There were mornings I could not eat. There were moments I wanted to scream. But I did not. I channeled it. I used it. I turned the pain into fuel. I turned the anger into focus. I turned the betrayal into strategy. That is the secret. Do not let the emotion consume you. Let it power you. Do not let the hate blind you. Let it sharpen your vision. See everything. Hear everything. Record everything. Then, when the time is right, strike. Not with rage, with precision. Julian's lawyer tried to argue that the recording was illegal. He tried to argue that it was an invasion of privacy. He tried to argue that I had hacked the system. We were ready for that. The system was company property. I was an officer of the company. I had administrative rights. The office was a place of business, not a private residence. The expectation of privacy was limited. The law was on my side, because I had done the homework, because I had consulted the experts, because I had followed the rules. Julian broke the rules. I used them. That is the difference between a criminal and a CEO. One breaks the law to get ahead, the other uses the law to stay ahead. I think about the future. I think about who will take over when I am done. I think about training a successor. I think about building a culture where this cannot happen again. I think about transparency. I think about accountability. I think about legacy. My father's legacy is safe. My legacy is just beginning. I am not just protecting the past, I am building the future. And I will build it on a foundation of truth. No more secrets. No more shadows. No more hidden mics needed. Because the light is the best disinfectant, I will keep the lights on. There is a satisfaction in knowing that you are right. Not just morally right, but factually right. When the numbers add up, when the law supports you, when the truth is undeniable, it is a quiet satisfaction. It does not need applause. It does not need validation. It is its own reward. I have that satisfaction. I carry it with me every day. It is in the way I walk. It is in the way I speak. It is in the way I look at people. I know what I am capable of. I know what I have done. I know what I will do. The world is full of Julians. There are always people who think they can take advantage. There are always people who think they are smarter than everyone else. There are always people who think the rules do not apply to them. Do not be afraid of them. Be prepared for them. Watch them. Listen to them. Wait for them. They will make a mistake. They always do. Arrogance is a flaw that cannot be fixed. It will always lead to a slip. It will always lead to a confession. It will always lead to a fall. You just have to be there to catch the evidence. You just have to be ready to present it. You just have to be willing to do what is necessary. I am not a hero. I am just a woman who did her job. I am just a sister who protected her birthright. I am just a citizen who upheld the law. If that makes me a hero to some, that is fine. But I do not do it for the title. I do it for the order. I do it for the balance. I do it because chaos is expensive. Justice is an investment, and the return on investment is peace. I have peace now, I have control, I have my life back, and I will not give it up, not for anyone, not for anything. The rain has stopped. The sky is clear. The city is shining. I turn off the light in my office. I lock the door. I walk to the elevator. I press the button. I wait. The doors open. I step inside. I press the button for the lobby. I watch the numbers go down. I watch my reflection in the metal doors. I look calm. I look composed. I look like someone who knows exactly where she is going. The doors open. I walk out. I walk through the lobby. I walk out into the night. The air is cool. I take a breath. I get in my car. I start the engine. I drive home. The story is over. The life continues. And I am the one writing the next chapter. They thought I was clueless. They thought I was weak. They thought I was done, but I was just getting started. I was listening. I was learning. I was waiting. And when the moment came, I was ready. The mic was on. The evidence was gathered. The trap was set. And the justice was served. Cold, controlled, absolute. That is how it ends. That is how it begins. That is how it is. I am Zymna. And I am here to stay.